Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out on this beautiful fall night that we have. My name is Kate Preen, and I'm a program manager at the Wisconsin Alumni Association. And this lecture tonight is part of the UW Showcase Lecture Series, and it's sponsored by the Capitol Lakes Retirement Community and the Wisconsin Alumni Association. Tonight's lecture is Sea Change, the Sea Grant Institute in Wisconsin. Tonight we have Moira Harrington, the communications manager for the Sea Grant Institute. Moira is a two-time UW alum with Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Political Science. Tonight, we're going to explore the Wisconsin Sea Grant, from leaping Asian carp to Wisconsin shipwrecks. Please join me in welcoming Moira Harrington.
Thanks for the introduction, Kate, and thanks everybody for coming out tonight. As Kate said, it's so gorgeous out there. I was tempted not to show up myself, but had to come. Duty calls. I also want to thank the Alumni Association for Kate for inviting me here. I confess to not even being aware of this speaker series at all. So kudos to all of you. You're pretty smart folks to even be aware that this is available to us. There's so many great lectures available to us in this city because of the university or the Wisconsin Academy or libraries. So this is another one I'm adding to my list. And I know there's a Civil War one coming up after this and the Amish. So I'll probably be out in your seat for the next couple ones of those. So I want to do a slide set. Seems like everybody in this day and age has got a slide set to do, and if technology works out for me, we'll just see a few short video clips done by one of my coworkers that I think will illuminate some of the things I'm talking about here. But before I do that, we'll do the obligatory participatory part of the evening. You get to raise your hand about something. So before you came here tonight, I'm going to ask about 4 things, and I think I know how this is going to go, but we'll find out. So before you came here tonight, how many of you had heard about the Great Lakes? Okay, that's what I thought how it would turn out. And it's not even in my title, but the Great Lakes are integral to what we're going to be talking about tonight. How about the Wisconsin idea, this notion that the boundaries of the state are the boundaries of the university, the innovation and research that happens on the university? Yep, should be passed around to the state and benefit all of us. Land grant colleges. Anybody hear about land grant colleges? Okay, yep. And then Sea Grant. So before you read my title, anybody even ever hear of the Sea Grant College? Well, Mary's cheating because she's a friend of mine. She's known it. So that's even higher than I thought, because mostly what I get is people think, oh, sea, that must mean ocean, that must mean beach umbrellas and pina coladas and saltwater beach. Not the case, and we'll explain a bit more in a moment. But I hope tonight to do 3 things. First of all, to evoke in you the most pleasant feeling you'd get sitting on a beach in Acapulco or something with that pina colada, but thinking about it for the sweetwater seas, as we call them, the Great Lakes or the inland oceans. The second thing I want to do tonight is show how these 4 things I asked you to raise your hand about, how they do all fit together: the Land Grant College, the Sea Grant College, the Wisconsin idea, and the Great Lakes. And then finally, what I want to do is share my enthusiasm for the wonderful assets we have right here in our backyard, the Great Lakes, and how much I love my job. I mean, every day I get to go and work on behalf of the Great Lakes. So you might, I'll just take a minute here, you might say, what's a communications manager? You know, I was hoping that maybe my director would be here tonight. Well, he's out on Lake Michigan sampling for mercury, so he couldn't be here. You get me. But a communications manager, so on a given day I might write a press release, or I might write some web copy. I might talk to my coworker John, who produces videos to tell the stories of our research. That's what I do on a daily basis. Sort of overall, what I do as a communications manager is I like to say that we build marine science literacy. We try to deepen people's understanding of the Great Lakes, deepen their appreciation, and from that lead to greater stewardship of these assets. So that's the big picture. All right, I'm going to dive into the slide set. So we got a picture up here. There's no water in this picture, but we are going to talk about the Sea Grant. So in a sense, our history dates back to 1862. That's the year Congress passed the Land Grant College Act, the Morrill Act. So this notion that the federal government would fund some research on college campuses, and then that research would be taken by agriculture extension agents and shared with farmers. So say we've got somebody at UW-Madison, which is the land grant institution in this state, working on corn yield. So he finds some breakthrough knowledge about corn yield, and then the ag extension agent takes it out to the counties and shares it with the corn farmers. Same kind of concept with the Sea Grant College. So about 100 years after the Land Grant College Act passed, there was a professor up at the University of Minnesota who has a fabulous name. His name is Athelstan Spilhouse. So Professor Spilhouse said, you know, this land grant thing has worked out really well. Why don't we try it for coastlines, the Great Lakes and the oceans? So Congress in 1966 passed the Sea Grant College Act. Housed within NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, we're funded for all the programs for the entire country at a level of about, I don't know, let's put it this way, we're authorized at 80 million. We get funded each year right around 60 million, and right now with sequestration, we're down at about 55 million. So we like to think we're a lean, mean program that does a lot of good stuff, and maybe that's a fourth thing I'd like to have you come away with tonight, that we do some good stuff on a good tight budget. So for every $2 of federal money that goes to a Sea Grant college, the state government kicks in $1. So what our tagline is for Wisconsin Sea Grant is science for the sustainable use of the Great Lakes. Every state in the country, including Puerto Rico and Guam, has a Sea Grant college. There are 33 of them. And it's the same model, again, as the land grant. We fund research, we take that research and have our own extension agents outreach, and we educate them. And I already mentioned the other 2 points. In our history, so we were one of the first Sea Grant colleges in the country. We actually were chartered in 1968, so 2 years after the act passed. And then in 1970, we started handing out research grants. So this is just a reflection of, in that time period, how much we've handed out in grant awards and to which institutions. So you'll see that it's the University of Wisconsin system has received funding, but also private colleges. And how many schools, and then the bottom bullet is how many students we have supported with that research money. You know, a professor at UW-Milwaukee has funding to study the food web, and he hires a graduate student or a PhD student. And so they're supported by this work, sort of building the next generation of marine science leaders, and we're quite proud of that. This is how our program is set up administratively. Wisconsin Sea Grant is a program of the University of Wisconsin system, but administered through the flagship campus right here in Madison. And then we've got offices along the coasts, and we've got a person working in the DNR office over in Waukesha. He does aquatic invasive species awareness raising and does quite a bit of work with the DNR. So we've got him housed right there. You can see my list of specialties. We've got some really interesting and talented folks on staff who know a lot about water quality or fisheries or visualizing the lakes, a geographic information specialist. And my image did not show up. I don't know why that is, but I had a lovely photo here of a plate of yellow perch. So I said I'd talk to you about how the Wisconsin idea hooks up with what all we're talking about. So we have funded a researcher for a number of years who has manipulated different brood stocks of yellow perch, this small fin fish that used to be commercially harvested out of the Great Lakes, but the fishery has collapsed. So, food web disruption, pollution, I'm not even certain why. But most of the perch that you're going to eat on a Friday night has come from Canada. So just a little aside here, most of the seafood that we eat in this country is from overseas or from Canada. We import 86% of the seafood in this country. So that's another reason why we're excited, if I had my picture up there, that we've been able to fund this researcher. He's figured out a way to get yellow perch to spawn out of season by manipulating water temperature and light and then these different genetic brood stocks. So we'll be able to grow our own fish in this country, in Wisconsin. And it's a perfect example of the Wisconsin idea, and it tastes good. Wait, there it is. I guess I should have clicked again, but there, now we're hungry and moving on. Oh, I didn't know this was going to do that. All right, this is just the shot of the fry that he has in his lab. Now let's talk about the Great Lakes, why we even exist. And of course, this is meant to evoke a glacier, even though it's not. So as we all know, glaciers covered much of New England, much of Canada, and the upper Midwest. And when they receded, about 70,000 years ago, they left behind 70,000 or 700,000? A long time ago. They left behind the Great Lakes. So now's the point of the talk where I get to wow you with some great factoids about the Great Lakes. Stuff you maybe have heard before, stuff that every time I hear it, I find it interesting. So let's see, the Great Lakes contain 6 quadrillion gallons of water. So if we were to drain the Great Lakes and cover the continental United States, the lower 48, we'd be underneath 9 feet of water. The Great Lakes, what else? I want to go over here and peek at my notes. What else do I want to know about the Great Lakes? So there's more coastline of the Great Lakes. If we were to unwrap it and lay it end to end and then wrap it around the Earth, it would go 44% of the width around the Earth's circumference. So there's more Great Lakes coastline than there is East Coast and Gulf Coast combined. The world's largest lake is Lake Superior. By surface area, I have to qualify that. Lake Baikal in Russia is deeper, but Lake Superior is the biggest lake in the world. It's also an interesting, well, I'll save that comment for a minute. So in Wisconsin, we have nearly 1 million acres of Great Lakes, of Lake Superior and Michigan within our boundaries. And we have, just under 1,000 miles of Great Lakes coastline. So it's important for Wisconsin. This is just a little arty shot to show, this is a fountain that stands near the Art Institute in Chicago, and the Great Lakes are the only lake system in the world that's interconnected. So this is just as depicting these lovely ladies with their basins of water and how Lake Superior flows into Lake Michigan and so on and so forth. Just a side shot, so 600 feet above sea level is Lake Superior, and a 2,000-mile journey down to the Atlantic Ocean. So this freshwater system is also the largest freshwater system in the world. 20% of the world's freshwater is in the Great Lakes, and 95% of the freshwater of the United States is right here, represented by this. It's also one of the most recognizable features from outer space for the Great Lakes. The scale and scope of these, I was just up on Lake Superior this morning, and it just never fails to take my breath away. You feel like you're standing at the ocean, and much like an ocean, the Great Lakes affect the weather around it, and also have dangers. So as part of our mission, sort of our Wisconsin idea of sharing information with the whole state, we do like to remind people that there are rip currents in the Great Lakes. People might think that's only if you're going to Florida you have to think about rip currents, but there's rip currents in the Great Lakes. And likewise, it's chilly in the Great Lakes. So clearly I have a shot of winter here, but Lake Superior year-round really doesn't ever get above 40 degrees. So the top, foot or so might warm up on a hot August day, but you get into that water at any depth, and hypothermia can set in within, a very short amount of time. Last Friday, Kate invited our organization to come to a parents' weekend over at Gordon Commons, and I wasn't able to go, but my coworkers said they had a really fun time doing an educational outreach activity with people, asking them, and people agree to this, which is amazing, plunging their arm into 38-degree weather, or 38-degree water, and we say, well, this is the temperature of Lake Superior year-round, and keep your hand in there for 30 seconds, and then after 30 seconds, see how many dimes you can pick up. And it demonstrates very quickly how, in such a short amount of time, you immediately start losing your fine motor skills, because in water that cold, your body starts shutting down your extremities to protect your core. So if you're out on Lake Superior, you go overboard and you don't have your life jacket on, somebody throws you a rope, you very quickly cannot even grab that. So a sobering message, and again, we love the lakes and use the lakes, but respect them. They're just as powerful and amazing entities as the ocean. All right, this is another old-timey slide, and once again, you don't see any water in this slide, but it's meant for me to use as a jumping-off point to talk about how the lakes have really helped shape our economy here in the Great Lakes Basin, in the region. We see some timber in the background, you see some agriculture. You don't see the miners, but I'm going to talk about mining kind of briefly. And just a reminder that the lakes have really helped shape our culture here and our economy. For 35 million people that live around the Great Lakes, some in Canada, obviously, some in the US, but a lot of people. And it's helped build our big cities. So we'll just do a quick photography tour through the Great Lakes, but here's a shot of Chicago, Milwaukee, great city on a Great Lake, Detroit, Cleveland, and Buffalo, Great Lakes, big cities. Just a reminder that it's a powerful economic engine, the Great Lakes. So a 2011 study done by the University of Michigan, responsible for 1.5 million jobs tied to the Great Lakes, whether it be shipping or manufacturing or the lumber industry. A $62 billion economy driven by the Great Lakes, one of the largest economies in the world. And we'll just kind of step through each of these areas that the Great Lakes support in a relatively brief period. Just a shot, another historical shot. Obviously, mining is much in the news, topic in the news in Wisconsin because of what they're proposing up along Lake Superior. But mining's been a part of our history for a number of years and drove the war effort in the last century from all the iron ore that came out of the open ore pits. I'm not advocating one way or another for the mine, just saying it's part of the region. For many years drove the world's largest steel making industry. Of course, that's declined a bit, but steel is still a big part of our manufacturing entity here in the Great Lakes region, as well as the other industries. Paper mills, of course, the biggest concentration of paper mills in the world is the Fox Valley, which leads to some other kind of contaminant problems that we'll talk about in a little bit. Oh, my bullets didn't turn out very well there. Let's click again. No, that's not going to help. Oh, I see. This is very tricky, Kate. All right, I'm supposed to build anticipation with my bullets, I guess, but they're all up there at once. So one of the busiest ports in the country is Duluth Superior, but there are other ports along the Great Lakes, mostly shipping the commodities of iron ore, coal, and grain. But from right here in the, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but from right here in the middle of the country, you can, in a relatively economically inexpensive way, move cargo around and in a greener fashion than moving it over land or on trains. Shipping is a pretty economical way to move your goods around. And there's the number of jobs related to Great Lakes shipping. Fishing. The fishery on the Great Lakes is worth $7 billion annually between recreational fishing and commercial fishing. On the shot on the right there is my coworker Phil Moy. He's our fisheries outreach specialist. So he was out with a commercial fisherman out on Lake Michigan about 2 years ago, and I like to put that on there because the irony is Phil knows a lot about fish and enjoys fishing, but is allergic to fish. So we are often the beneficiaries of his hobby when he goes out fishing. We get to eat that because he can't eat his fish that he catches. So I wanted to use this as a sort of a jumping off point to get into a little bit more detail to talk about fishing in the Great Lakes. And again, if my technology works, I'll show you a video in a minute. And And again, to illustrate the value of the Wisconsin idea, how knowledge generated here is taken and shared and benefits more than just this, the campus boundaries. So before I started working for Sea Grant, I didn't really know much about Lake Sturgeon. This is a shot of Lake Sturgeon. These are really cool, charismatic fish. They can live to be 100 years old. They can be 9 feet long. They can weigh up to 300 pounds. They're just a really interesting fish. They're considered prehistoric fish. They survived 250 million years and several mass extinctions. Their skin is like a shark. It's like cartilage. They don't have bones, but they don't have teeth. They feed they have got these dangling barbels that they sense creatures that live in the sediment, and then that's how they eat their bottom feeders. And they're a big part of the Great Lakes ecosystem, except in the early part of last century, they were overfished or considered a junk fish, and essentially have vanished from much of the Great Lakes, except in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has the world's healthiest population of lake sturgeon, so much so that you may be familiar with the spearing season up on the Lake Winnebago chain in the spring. Many places, well, nowhere else can you do that because we have a healthy population here, so we can manage it and allow people to spear as it used to be done at the beginning of last century. So we've worked, our fisheries guy has worked in conjunction with the DNR to help manage the fishery of Lake Sturgeon, along with a private NGO conservation group called Sturgeon for Tomorrow. So it's really kind of a nice kind of comeback story for sturgeon in Wisconsin. So much so that a couple of years ago, one of my colleagues wrote a coffee table book called People of the Sturgeon. And recently I've hired a PhD. Well, he's got his PhD, but when he first started working for me, he was working toward his PhD in something, again, I'd never heard of before, but acoustic ecology. He's a student at the Nelson Institute on campus, and he was studying how we interact with sound. So he's been working for me in the communications office and producing audio podcast stories for us. And he also came to me at one point and said, this People of the Sturgeon book is wonderful, and I think I could do a really nice job with it if I adapted it into an audio book, had the author read it and get some other voices on it and some other recordings. So he said, I'd like to go up when the sturgeon are spawning near the Shawano Dam in the spring a couple of years ago, and would you buy for me an underwater microphone so I can just gather some sound kind of from the area? And I said, sure, I'll spend $150 out of my budget and buy you an underwater microphone. So he went up with his microphone, and before he went, he'd heard quite a bit about this sort of legend, lore from the Native Americans. For hundreds of years, they would say they knew the sturgeon were coming back to spawn because they would hear thunder. It'd be a perfectly clear day or night, but you could hear this very low, it sounded like thunder off in the distance. People didn't really understand what it meant or what it was, but that it was associated with the sturgeon. Or the DNR wardens that would be there at the time of spawning, they'll net some of the sturgeon and then take body measurements and maybe tag some of them and then release them. And so they'd put their nets in the water and they could feel this vibration in the nets, and nobody really knew what it was. So Chris, my student, went with his underwater microphone and dunked it in the water and pulled it out and said, and he's able to very much manipulate sound files. So he was able to pull this sound into the range of human hearing. And it's a low rumble that the sturgeon are producing. It's never been recorded before. It's never been pulled into the range of human hearing. He's donated the sound to the Macaulay Library at Cornell University, which has a wonderful catalog of animal sounds. And he's doing further research. He's got funding from the National Science Foundation. He's working with a biologist at the DNR. And they're thinking that this is somehow related to the success of sturgeon spawning. So once they learn a bit more, they'll be able to share it with resource managers throughout the Great Lakes Basin and figure out, like an elephant or a whale that's able to produce sound, how are they doing this? How as we as people, how can we help enhance the rocks underneath them so the sound can echo better for the fish? What can we do to help use this sound to help them sort of have a population come back? So I like that story a lot. And I just want to show, if I can do this, like I said, just a little bit of a video on just so you can see the sturgeon. And this is a 7-minute video approximately. We aren't going to watch all that.
Fish, and they're prehistoric, and people like looking at big fish, and every one is bigger than the next, it seems.
I like to watch them. It's different.
Because they're so close and they're right at your feet, you can reach out and touch them. There's no place else that you can really go and see fish in this abundance.
They're really cool looking.
The actual history of the fish is pretty incredible in itself.
These fish will literally come right onto the rocks and begin twisting and turning and spawning, and it's really quite a show. It's really something to see.
Look at. Look down in the water. Look at the fishies in the water.
Just because how old they get and stuff like that. And
I like to watch when they. I like to watch them when they like fight sometimes.
Everybody says they're ugly, but I think they're beautiful.
First of all, it's prehistoric, and so it's only like 1 million years old. It doesn't have any scales like regular fish. It's got cartilage like a shark. The females don't even come up to spawn until they're 25 or 30 years old. The big ones are the females, the small ones are the males. And our state has done a good job in terms of preserving them and putting in the riprap and giving them spots to lay their eggs. Just the sturgeon themselves, in terms of their numbers, it's always unbelievable to see 16 to 20 fish in one pod, all rolling and pushing and flipping, each other. And so that's a pretty phenomenal sight, to think that you're only 3 feet away from being able to witness that. It's one of the better parts of Wisconsin, in my mind.
Okay, so that gives you a little bit of a sense of those very cool fish and why I like them and why I like my job. Okay, now I need to figure out how to get my slide set back. Well, actually, I'll just go to another video, so pretty quick. And the next slide I was going to show you was just a shot of recreation, the final sort of business I was going to talk to related to the Great Lakes. And in Wisconsin, tourism, of course, is a big deal. I know that in the coastal counties of Wisconsin, tourism is worth about $5 billion. So you can say a large part of that is due to the Great Lakes. So I wanted to use that as a jumping off point to talk a little bit more and show you another video about one aspect of tourism, and that is shipwrecks. So Wisconsin also leads the nation in shipwrecks listed on the National Register of Historic Places. There's like 45 Wisconsin shipwrecks listed. Now, I have some friends who like to joke with me, like, why are people who, pilot ships in Wisconsin such bad sailors that so many of them sunk in Wisconsin waters? Not the case. We're just really good about exploring them, mapping them, making them accessible to scuba divers who might want to go and recreationally dive them. In addition, maybe some of you are aware of this, but there's a maritime trail system throughout the state of Wisconsin. So literally, you can walk along the shoreline, and there's markers set up to say, 20 feet out, there's a shipwreck. It sunk in 1862. The cargo had been lumber. Tragically, 3 people lost their lives. And so it's really, we're really capturing and recreating and honoring our maritime heritage. And it's done with a lot of funding from Wisconsin Sea Grant. Every 2 years, we have a research cycle and fund underwater archaeologists from the Wisconsin Historical Society. And then we explore these wrecks. And as I said, make them a part of the Maritime Trail, put them on the website, give talks about them. And so much so that it's gotten the notice of the National Ocean Service. So I was on the phone earlier this week with a woman with the National Ocean Service who said that they would like to cite another national marine sanctuary in the country. Right now there are 14 national marine sanctuaries. I don't need this yet. And they'd like Wisconsin to be another site. Now it'll be competitive, and other sites from around the country may want to have this located in their states, but they'd like because of Wisconsin's good hard work on shipwrecks, they'd like to put it along Lake Michigan, and it'll attract tourists. So that's one cool thing. The second cool thing is my boss was just telling me, and I can't name the name of this school because we're in early negotiations, but there's a private nonprofit foundation that funds a maritime archaeology degree program at a college in the southern part of the country. And because of Wisconsin's great commitment to its maritime history, its archaeology that we already do here, this private foundation would like to move out of this southern school and come up to Madison. So they will be here, I think in 2 weeks, meeting with the dean of the graduate school. So someday, you know, kids from Wisconsin or kids who come to the University of Wisconsin-Madison might be able to get a degree in marine archaeology, which I think is pretty cool. So the second video I wanted to show you was just, let's get wet a little bit. Let's just look at a shipwreck video. And this is done by John Carl.
It's another day on the Australasia Shipwreck Exploration Project, led by maritime archaeologists at the Wisconsin Historical Society. One of the many volunteers on the project is Diver Paul. He answered questions from people on shore at Whitefish Dunes State Park.
What this is a hull of a ship that burned to its waterline. And our goal today and over the next few days is to map every piece of wood, every piece of structure, and its relationship to the other structures to survey the condition that the ship's in right now.
Up in Door County, near Whitefish Bay Dune.
We had some friendly little fish of some sort. Very curious little fellows, except when I shooed them away. The visibility this year was very good, but not nearly as good as last year when Tammy Thompson took these still photos of the shipwreck. And Tammy found a shoe in the wreck. There was no leg attached to it. There were no fatalities in the shipwreck. Nobody lost their lives. And we don't know if the shoe belonged to one of the original sailors, or maybe it was dropped by another vessel passing over much after the wreck happened.
So that's, again, probably
Tomorrow
enough.
it's back into the water to continue mapping the Australasia.
So they do leave all the artifacts at the dive sites. Even if there were human remains, they would leave them there. And obviously it's a grave site. You know, they do invite recreational divers to come and look, but they ask to please respect some of those sites because it is a grave site. So let me see if I get my slide set back. Now I say thanks, Kate. I do need you to tell me how to get out of this. Oh yeah, duh, of course. All right, we'll catch up on the slides. So there was the sturgeon. It was just talking about tourism and the importance of tourism in the region. There showed you my video. And now we'll talk about some current challenges with the Great Lakes. As you can see in my bullet points there, aging infrastructure, the aquatic invasive species, fisheries management, and the chemicals and low water levels. So I'll relatively briefly step through a little bit more about each of these and then hopefully show, again, Wisconsin Idea, what Wisconsin Sea Grant is doing to address these challenges. So, yeah, aging infrastructure. The shipping traffic internationally has grown by 600%. And then up in the Duluth Superior Port, I mentioned it's one of the busiest ports in the country. They've had a very bizarre situation going on. Yards and yards of steel infrastructure in the port has developed these strange kind of rusted out pits and weakening the steel. And then if it would crumble, it would be millions of dollars to replace it. So we have a coastal engineer on staff who happens to also be based in Superior, so he's literally right next to the ports, and has spent a lot of time with some engineering firms and diving around the structures and has figured out a way to put some protective coating on the steel corrosion as well as these kind of metal jackets to sort of preserve and see what we can do to lengthen the life of this infrastructure. So, and that's not just that's a bizarre kind of problem going on, freshwater steel corrosion, but there's other infrastructure crumbling on our nation's ports and harbors, including in the Great Lakes, so it's a challenge. Invasive species, up in the upper left there, my left, whatever. Asian carp, you probably have heard about that in the news. These carp were brought to the United States years ago to be used on fish farms in the southern part of the country to keep the ponds clean. And then in some flooded times, the water rose up and they got into the Mississippi River. So they're making their way up the Mississippi River. And because there's an unnatural connection between the Mississippi River and the Lake Michigan and Great Lakes system, the carp are making their way across the Illinois River, and some people have found them in the Great Lakes already. The trouble with them is these also get to be very large fish. You've already heard me express my admiration for a large lake sturgeon. I don't feel as admirable about an Asian carp. They eat so much on a daily basis. They essentially would probably starve out other fish in the food web if they did get there in large numbers. So Phil, the gentleman who was pictured in that earlier slide with the giant fish, has spent a lot of years working on this electric barrier down in the Illinois River that essentially shocks the fish, any kind of fish, from going through the river and out into Lake Michigan. It's probably not the be-all and end-all solution. Probably the best solution is to separate the two basins again, but the people in Chicago are not very happy with that. Millions of dollars to change that. Other invasive species are pictured up here, and sort of the notion with that is that these are perfectly fine creatures in their native habitats, but when they come to the Great Lakes, a different habitat for them, it just disrupts the ecosystem, forces out the native-ish plants. You don't have as much diversity. Quagga mussels. I was talking to one of our researchers last week, and he estimates there's 300 trillion quagga mussels in Lake Michigan. So what they do is filter the water and filter out these almost microscopic phytoplankton, and the phytoplankton therefore are not available to tiny forage fish, and therefore the forage fish aren't being there in as prevalent of numbers for the larger predator fish. So it's just skewing the whole traditional food web in Lake Michigan. Those three other organisms that are pictured up here, well, not the loosestrife, but the fish and the quagga mussels, you probably have heard this story. They've come through the St. Lawrence Seaway on these ocean-going ships. So the ocean-going ships maybe fill up in the Baltic Sea, fill up their ballast tanks. When they get into the Great Lakes, they release some of that ballast, and these creatures are in the ballast water. So they're not native to this area and are disruptive.
Wasn't there also a problem with lampreys?
Oh, you bet. Yep, same thing. So I was just in Superior yesterday with a bunch of scientists, and I thought we'd sort of solved the lamprey problem. Not the case. So same thing. They've come from overseas, and they're parasitic. They'll latch on to big sport fish and literally bleed them dry, kill them. So the round goby, same notion, is driving out the native fish, eating smaller things. That's part. Oh, you asked about the yellow perch. Yes, that's partly why the yellow perch have collapsed. They've displaced food sources for yellow perch. They're little fish, yeah, but they're eating food that the native fish typically would have eaten. They're just more aggressive, they're better at it, and so they're displacing others. Those were round gobies in that shipwreck video I showed you, that when the narrator said, oh, here's some cute little fish, those were round gobies. No, they're really bony. So the Great Lakes fishery, we do spend time working with resource managers and funding researchers to say what kind of fish and how are they doing in the Great Lakes. As I mentioned before, valued at $7 billion annually. Many people would say that our trout and salmon in the Great Lakes could be considered a non-native species as well, because it's gotten to the point where we stock them so much every year that the commercial and the sport fisher, and that's what I mean to say. The charter businesses really rely on the salmon and the trout to take people out and fish for these. So it's sort of like, how do you balance that? How many do you put back in? How many can the system support? There's the lamprey bullet up there that we just talked about. The whitefish are a popular good-eating fish in the region, and they are on decline. Yellow perch has collapsed, and then there's a continuing problem with contaminants in our waterways, particularly mercury. I mentioned my boss is out on Lake Michigan right now, sampling for mercury and how that's affecting our fisheries. Oh, this got kind of fuzzy, but that's okay. You get the idea. So there is something called areas of concern. So Lake Michigan is the only one of the Great Lakes that's entirely within the boundaries of the United States. All the other lakes are shared with Canada. So with Canada, Environment Canada and the US EPA has designated these areas as contaminated. There's a series of checklists to say, boy, this use is impaired because of contaminants and pollution. Mercury continues to be a problem. PCBs continue to be a problem. I mentioned the paper industry earlier. So the Fox River in Wisconsin flows north, and the largest source of pollution in all of Lake Michigan is the Fox River. So, which surprised me when I learned that. You look at how big Lake Michigan is, and you'd think with all the industry and population down on its southern half near Gary, Indiana, and Chicago, no, the biggest source of pollution is what flows through those paper mills and all the heavily agricultural area of the Fox River. So, you've also heard emerging contaminants in the waterways are pharmaceuticals, personal care products that our wastewater treatment facilities are not able to filter out, and so we need to figure out ways to clean these up. We're funding a researcher on this campus who's doing a lot of work with frogs, Dr. Bill Karasoff. He's using those as sort of a sentinel species, and he's looked at PBDEs. So don't ask me what that stands for. That's the abbreviation. But it's flame retardant that is used on our computers and large appliances. It's getting into the waterways and affecting the frogs and therefore affecting us. Good news is, I'll just share one more story. On this campus, we funded a researcher named Dr. Martin Schaefer, and he's figured out a way to measure copper and cadmium in the waterways. That's traditionally been hard to measure. And when it is in the waterways, either from a wastewater treatment facility or from metal roofs, it can be toxic to aquatic organisms. So he's figured out a way to measure that, and now the EPA is using that to measure waterways around the country. So that's a good news story. From there, we can learn how to fix it, and then once we know the scope of the problem in certain waterways. Thanks to research here. Low lake levels, not much we can do about this. It is a fact of nature. Although some people have said low lake levels could be tied to climate change. There's less ice cover than there has been in the past, and the water's evaporating more quickly. So it's a problem, obviously, for aesthetics. It's a problem at marinas and harbors. Harbors rely, big ports rely on ships being able to get in and out. Marinas for recreational boats rely on, a channel deep enough to get out. And if the lake level drops, there's an economic impact on that. Wish I had a way to tell you how we could fix that, but I don't. All right, and I'm just going to leave you with this slide, a series of bullets on just why water is important to us. Again, a reminder of why we're so lucky to have this asset right in our backyard. Just some sobering facts about people affected by water shortages, contaminated water, how it's affecting people, and the use of water. So that's what I got. I can take questions. Before I do that, I just want to mention I did leave some newsletters on the back table. Probably a lot of you picked those up. Feel free to become a subscriber. We don't charge for it, and you could either get a print hard copy edition or let us know if you want it electronically. And if I've run out of newsletters back there, I did put a little thing back there that says fortune-telling fish, and inside is a little fortune-telling fish. Mostly I put those back there because on the back it has our website address. You can log on and watch more videos, learn more about us, or get in touch and subscribe to the newsletter. So there you have it.
Raise your hand if you have questions, and I'll run around with the microphone so everyone can hear us.
I don't need this.
You said that there wasn't as much pollution coming from the heavy industry area down in the southern part of Lake Michigan. is it a different type of runoff, or do they do a better job of controlling it than we do?
I don't know that it's different or they do a better job. I think it's more just the volume. Because if you think about, I don't have a map of Wisconsin here, but if you think about how long the Fox River is and the fact that it flows north and it empties right into that large bay of Green Bay, and it's, you maybe have heard the term phosphorus loading, heavy agriculture, heavy, what's the term I'm looking for? We put that on the fields to have things grow better, but then it runs off the fields and then there's a dead zone in Green Bay as much as there is in the Gulf of Mexico because of all this phosphorus runoff. So we do have people on our staff who are working with the DNR to sort of lower the amount of fertilizer that's spread on fields to reduce that. And the paper mills are doing a better job of not releasing as much effluent, but it still exists in the sediment. They're still dredging that and cleaning that up. I think it's just a question of volume. I don't know that they're doing anything differently down in the south.
Hi. Early in the presentation, you mentioned that the steel industry benefited from the Great Lakes. Is that a correlation between the lakes and the iron ore deposits, or is that more
iron
like
ore
the
deposits,
glaciers,
absolutely,
or?
and just having the ability to ship things more easily around, so you're not going overland with it. That was my point. Nothing more complex than that.
Questions?
A few years back, my granddaughter and I took limnology at Grandparents University, and maybe some of the rest of you have too. One of the things that I remember was talking about the different depths of the lakes and how we thought that Lake Ontario was dead, but it has come back. Would you comment on that one?
Boy, now you're challenging me.
Oh, sorry. What do they do to make it come back?
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing, but I like to say, because I do communications, I know a lot of really general things, but not, and here we're talking about lake depth, but I don't know things in real depth like that. So I don't know if it's they've... The shallow, yeah, and maybe it's they've reduced the inputs in there, like we were just talking about earlier. Lake Erie, so it was Lake Ontario. Oh, it was Erie, okay, so that makes sense. Yeah, Lake Erie is the most shallow of the lakes, and they still have quite a bit of problems with these harmful algal blooms that they talk about, but they've done a good job of, again, trying to reduce the inputs into the lake. So, yes, it was Lake Erie, yep.
Obviously, there's several states involved, and also Canada. Is there some central coordinating entity that brings these people into harmony about what the attempts are?
Right, yeah. So you're talking about cleaning up the lakes? Yes. Yeah. Well, you probably heard of the Great Lakes Compact, which was signed by the Premier of Canada, governors of the Great Lakes states, and so that's really, I don't know all the details of it, but very much saying let's recognize what an asset the Great Lakes are and how important freshwater is. I like to say that our freshwater is, in the coming 100 years is going to be even more valuable than Middle Eastern oil. So this was a notion to get out ahead of, let's start putting some requirements on how people are going to use it, and we're not going to just let people from Arizona drain it, that kind of thing. So same kind of notion with cleaning it up. So the last 2 days I was just up in Superior, and it was quite an amazing meeting. There's an EPA lab in Duluth, and there must have been 200 people in that room easily. Fish and Wildlife Service, US EPA, my program, the Sea Grant Institute was there, but people from Environment Canada. And it was solid 2 days of presentations on here's how we've been monitoring the eagle population, the snake population, the lake sturgeon population. Here are the chemicals we're finding in the waterways. Here's how climate change is affecting things. And it was this really just this sense of, as they kept saying, we're the coalition of the willing. We're the coalition of the willing. We want to get together and talk about how we keep our lakes healthy. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, there's a lot of cooperation and a lot of appreciation for these assets.
Do we have any other questions for the group? Oh, wait. This is my workout.
You discuss a lot about Wisconsin area. I'm from Chicago, so I know about the carp situation. But do you work with, say, the Shed Aquarium, the Field Museum, the water reclamation system in Chicago?
You know, I've been with this program, the Sea Grant program, for 3 years, but before I came, a lot of people on my staff did. Not so much since I've come, but yeah, those are great resources to share knowledge and information and educate the public about the Great Lakes. I also mentioned that there are Sea Grant programs in all the other coastal states, so I do work with people at Illinois, Indiana Sea Grant. It's a combined 2 states program. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of good work going on to talk about the Great Lakes.
Well, Moira, thank you very much. Everyone, please join me in thanking Moira with a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks.
We'll be back here on October 24th for our next UW Showcase lecture series, and that's Professor Stephen Kantrowitz talking about the Civil War. So please feel free to stick around and ask questions if you have any. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next month on Wisconsin.